Start with the Education and Energy Minister, Josh Frydenberg, who, as I say, joins us live from Melbourne. Thanks very much for your company.
Nice to be with you, Pete.
Any chance of a unified position, do you think, in the coalition by the end of this drawn-out process in relation to the Finkel report, or will there always be dissidents?
Oh, look, I think there'll always be differences of opinion on the issue of energy policy and its integration or interaction with climate change, but we certainly had a very positive, constructive discussion, nearly 3 hours in length in our party room last week. And of course, people were commenting about the recently released Finkel review. No particular position, Peter, was taken to the party room other than for me to explain what is happening in energy markets and what were the key recommendations of Dr. Finkel. He had undertaken extensive and comprehensive engagement around the world and domestically over a period of 8 months, together with his expert panel, and they've put forward a number of recommendations that it's only proper that we give full and due consideration.
Is it your view that people have been a little bit premature in the coalition to criticise the prospect of the government following Finkel review recommendations? People, for example, talking about it whilst at the same time acknowledging that they haven't actually read the report.
Well, a lot of my colleagues have read the report, and a lot of my colleagues are well versed in these issues, and it's certainly a barbecue stopper. Just yesterday, one of my New South Wales colleagues rang me and said he was at a community barbecue and his electorate and half a dozen people had raised the issue of electricity prices. They're not so much concerned with the Finkel review out there in the electorate. What they're concerned about is the hip pocket punch that they're getting from rising electricity prices.
Can I just interrupt you on that one, Minister, and ask about that? I mean, we'll get to Finkel and where you go from here in a moment, but in terms of that hip pocket, as you put it, hit that people are facing, the coalition has been in power since 2013. Energy prices have significantly risen since then. What are the causes of that?
Well, there are three reasons why prices have gone up, but to put it in perspective, they went up a multiple of what they're going up now under the Labor Party. They saw, when Gillard and Rudd were in power, they saw electricity prices double. There was gold plating across the networks, and then there was the dreaded $15 billion hit from the carbon tax. It's been much more incremental since we've been in office, and it's particularly around the lift in the wholesale price or the generation costs. And there are three reasons driving that. First, the higher gas prices. We are seeing a tripling of domestic gas prices from around $3 to $4 a gigajoule to $10 to $12 a gigajoule today over the last 5 years, and that's flowing through to the way electricity prices are set. The second reason that we're seeing higher electricity prices around the generation component is much tighter supply in the market. We've seen 9 coal-fired power stations close over the last 5 years, and when supply goes out and demand stays the same, then obviously price will go up. And then the third reason is the political or regulatory uncertainty around the integration of climate and energy policy, and that has been a constant in Australian politics.
Well, it's been a constant, hasn't it? It's been a constant, really, because of the unwinding of the carbon tax.
Well, that was a terrible policy and would have only led to higher prices and would have punished those who could least afford it most. So,
yet, ironically, though, Minister, ironically, you're not necessarily wrong about that, but ironically, the sector, the business sector as well, is now of a view that it's a lesser of evils to the uncertainty that pervades now.
I wouldn't say that is a uniform view at all. Indeed, one major company that came out in favour of the Finkel review was Australia's largest manufacturer, BlueScope, and they had been on the record on the carbon tax, and they certainly weren't supporters of that. And they understand, as a big user of power, that we do need to solve for the regulatory uncertainty, because people who are investing, whether it's in coal or in gas or in renewables, need to make 30 to 40-year bets. And when they're doing so, they want to be certain of what will be the regulatory environment they face over the lifetime of their investment. And that's why the Finkel review gives us a lot to think about, because his recommendation around a clean energy target is trying to solve for that particular issue as well as a few others.
Okay, so looking forward, as you say, when financing in this area people need to make a 30 or 40-year investment, and they need to make a determination of the viability of such an investment over such a prolonged period of time. There isn't the interest, clearly, from financiers to fund coal-fired power over that kind of length of time. They have profound concerns about where it will sit vis-a-vis other energy stocks or attitudes toward climate change by governments writ large. Does that mean that there's a role for government to finance coal-fired power stations to have energy security during the decades between now and then?
Well, there's certainly a role for government in the overall energy mix, and you saw the government's announcement recently about Snowy Hydro 2.0 and the major
we can get to
we're
that,
willing
but
to make
Minister, what about coal-fired power in particular? Is there a role for government-owned and operated coal-fired power stations?
Well, look, I think the market is willing to look at coal-fired power stations. There's certainly been a degree of interest in new capacity, provided you can get regulatory certainty. Indeed, Dr. Finkel himself has said that it's conceivable that a new coal-fired power station could be built. But, Peter, the main point out of the Finkel review was that coal will continue to play a very significant part in our energy mix going forward. And over 50% of the national electricity market's power will come from coal by 2030. And he points out that if that regulatory certainty can be provided, then it's much more likely that these coal-fired power stations will be able to get the finance to do a retrofit or an upgrade or improve the maintenance programs within these coal-fired power stations.
What are the chances of that
to last 50 to 60 years?
But what are the chances of that, given that Labor seems to be pretty strongly against coal-fired power as the alternative major party of government, and the biggest minor party, the Greens, are dead set against it?
Well, the Greens are irrelevant in this climate change debate. I mean, they've shown themselves to be zealots, really, and you've seen what happened over the CPRS and the renewable energy targets, which they voted against, where you think that was consistent with their worldview. So they've really dealt themselves out of the game based on their zealotry. When it comes to the Labor Party, they're being highly irresponsible with their comments on coal, because they fail to understand that coal provides baseload dispatchable power, and we rely on it heavily in order not just to bring the price down, but also to keep the lights on. And in South Australia, where Jay Weatherill conducted a big experiment that went horribly wrong, the Northern Power Station was pushed out of the market and closed, being a coal-fired power station, because of the rapid uptake of renewables in that state. And obviously that's created the most unstable and most costly energy system across the national electricity market. So coal is absolutely critical. And I'd say to Bill Shorten and to Mark Butler, be responsible here. Don't just think about the blue-collar jobs in the mines and in the power stations. Think about the 800,000 plus blue-collar jobs in Australia's manufacturing industries who are now facing an uncertain future because of rising electricity prices. This is the #1 concern, Peter, in the party room of my colleagues.
So can you
How do we get electricity
bring them
prices
down? Can you actually bring prices down? Do you believe that?
I do believe we can, and we're
Over
trying
what
to do
sort
it.
of time frame?
Well, the quickest thing we can do is to ensure more gas that is currently going for export is able to go to domestic consumption and domestic use in the electricity grid. And that is something the Prime Minister has announced he wants to do. He's established a restriction on the export controls, a sort of a gas security mechanism. He wants that in place by July 1, and I think that can put downward pressure on prices.
But there's a different, I just want to clarify this, put downward pressure on the increase in prices, I understand. But do you honestly think that, this time next year or the year after, like for like, people's power bills can be cheaper than they currently are?
Well, as I say, gas is selling for $10 to $12 a gigajoule, with some customers being quoted up to $20 a gigajoule. I certainly believe that it can be brought down to what is called the netback price, which is $8 to $10, which is what it should be here, minus the transportation that and the cost to get it overseas. So I think that is something we can rapidly do. There's work that we have announced that we're undertaking around reining in the network costs. We've got the ACCC looking at the retail component of the bill. You see, it's very important to understand, Peter, that a electricity bill is made up of retail components, generation components and poles and wires, as well as some green schemes. And the state governments too have a big role to play because they own some of those networks.
Do you get
the generation.
Is it your view that voters perhaps aren't aware of that most people tend to sort of look to the feds and say it's your job to bring down power prices without recognising that a large chunk, the overwhelming chunk of power price increases come back to state rules and state responsibilities?
I think that's a very fair point. And certainly that was a frustration expressed by a number of my colleagues as well, that the states just don't step up to the plate on this issue, that they've historically owned the generation assets, and they still do in Queensland. In fact, it's been a disgrace in Queensland because Anastasia Palaszczuk has been beefing up her balance sheet at the expense of consumers because they own the generation assets and they've been happy to hold back supply in order to get an increased price.
But politically speaking, if we acknowledge, as you've just done, that overwhelmingly this is something that states have control over with their settings, isn't it just politically silly for the government to be talking about the capacity to bring down energy prices, given that, by and large, this is something that the states have a bigger impact on?
Well, there are shared responsibilities here, and I chair the COAG Energy Council, which brings all the state energy ministers together.
When's it next meeting?
The next meeting is mid-July, July 13, 14, and obviously that will be an important meeting to consider and discuss the outcomes of the Finkel review. But Peter, the states still own a lot of the generation and the networks, infrastructure and assets. But Dr. Finkel made it very clear that a national scheme without the reckless state-based renewable energy targets would be much more preferable for the consumer.
So will you be asking them to take them off the table at that meeting in mid-July?
I already have. I've already made it very clear that states pursuing reckless 50% renewable energy targets in states like Queensland, which only have 4.5% renewables today, or in South Australia, we've seen how that's gone badly wrong, or indeed in Victoria with their own schemes, together with these mindless moratoriums and bans on gas development, be it unconventional gas like...
This is a bipartisan criticism, isn't it? Because this happens in both Liberal and Labor states.
Yeah, but by and large it's happening in these Labor states. In Victoria they've got a ban on unconventional gas.
But the opposition aren't... In Victoria, my understanding is the opposition aren't exactly clamouring to turn that around.
But Peter, in Victoria, the opposition don't have a restriction or a moratorium on conventional onshore gas extraction, which the Victorian Daniel Andrews-led government does. And that is a big difference. In the Northern Territory, the Labor government there is sitting on 180 years' worth of gas reserves, but has refused to develop it. So I think the states really need to put their consumers first, need to be upfront that their policies are hurting businesses and households in their own constituency, and hopefully we can make a difference at the next COAG meeting on that.
If you've got a COAG meeting where you want to discuss the issue of the state response to Finkel during the winter recess in or around mid-July, is it your hope that you'll have established a coalition position on that before you go to that meeting? You wouldn't want to go there, surely, without having any idea of what your own party position is, surely?
Well, Peter, as you know, this issue's been around of energy and climate for a long time. We've just got a comprehensive report. It's a delicate issue within the party room for obvious reasons because of its history.
Minister, I understand all of that, but how do you turn up with any credibility at a COAG meeting asking the states to take a position on Finkel when you haven't got a position yourself?
Well, I'm just saying that we have to proceed carefully, and I'm not going to be rushing the Commonwealth's position or in any way preempting the party room's deliberations of this issue, because my colleagues come first and we need to work out what our position is on the Finkel report.
How long is that going to take?
Well, I'm not going to rush it, I'm not going to put a time frame on it, but there are some recommendations, obviously, which are less controversial than others. For example, the requirement that wind and solar provide their own battery storage and their own stability services called Inertia.
But are we talking
or
this year?
FCAS.
I mean, will the coalition take a position on Finkel this year?
Well, again, I don't want to put a deadline on it, but Finkel himself is envisaging his model coming in potentially for 2019, 2020, which is still some time away. So
Sure, but you've got to get all the mechanisms in place, Minister.
Sure.
I mean, at the end of the day, we're in mid-2017. If you can't be sure by the beginning of 2018 that you've even got a coalition position, much less going about the task of then trying to bring the states on board, trying to ensure where the opposition sits, trying to have an election position, trying to get it all implemented ahead of 2019, you'd want to get on with it, surely.
Well, you're right. There is there are a number of steps that need to be gone through before this position could be landed. But it's much more important to the country that we get the policy right than meeting some arbitrary timetable, and I think that's the key point. We've already started those discussions. Cabinet will have its own deliberations as well. These are very complex issues. There are a lot of different variables. Everyone recognises business as usual is not an option.
Is it about getting the policy?
Get on with it.
Is it about getting the policy right, Minister? I put it to you, it sounds like when you talk about the coalition party room, given the history of this, it's more about getting the politics right.
Well, good policy at the end of the day is good politics, and that's a truism that we're all familiar with. So I'm going to get the policy right.
Is it good politics and/or good policy to do what Tony Abbott's former chief of staff has suggested in today's Sunday News Limited papers and have a state-owned coal-fired power station? I mean, for example, is that good policy for a Liberal government?
Well, there are state coal-fired power stations
have a new one
owned in Queensland, and indeed I note that the Queensland opposition leader, Tim Nicholls, in his budget and reply speech just last week, Peter, announced that he wants to build a coal-fired power station for northern Queensland. I think the key point for your viewers to understand is, coal is important in the current energy mix and will be important for decades to come.
There's no doubt about that. I accept that, but I guess what I'm asking is...
You have to reiterate that point too.
And I accept that, but do you as Minister have a sympathy for or a want to build a new, at a federal government level, coal-fired power station?
Well, I would have no problem if somebody out there in the market wanted to go and build a new coal-fired power station, because that would just add to the overall baseload power that we have and we need in our system. As for government decisions, you're asking me to jump the gun there. We've got a process underway to consider Finkel, all its implications. There are extensive negotiations and discussions going on among my colleagues, and we'll continue to have those and land a position in due course.
You're watching Sunday Agenda. We're talking to the Energy and Environment Minister, Josh Frydenberg. We're going to continue to do so after the break. We've been focusing on his portfolio. A lot to discuss, from leaks from the midwinter ball to the whole issue of Gonski funding to even the possibility of contempt for some senior government ministers out of Victoria. Back in a moment.
Are you ready for your next trip? It's good to know that Booking.com offers free cancellation on most rooms in case, well, life gets in the way. Aw, look at that cute face. Good thing with Booking.com, you stay flexible, whatever happens in your life. And there are plenty of options to rebook. Visit Booking.com now and start planning your next trip. Booking.com. Booking.yeah.
Say hello to Kia Sportage GT line, packed with features like panoramic sunroof.
Got a tough job? Get stuck into it with America's best-selling Gorilla Tape. Double thickness adhesive grips rough, uneven and dirty surfaces for a lasting weather-resistant hold. Gorilla Tape, for the toughest jobs on planet Earth.
The debate continues across the nation. What is this chocolate blend?
I'm still getting creamy dark.
I'm sticking to intense then smooth.
Let's swap.
Hey, this one's empty.
Intense cocoa blended with the creaminess of milk chocolate. Cadbury Dark Milk. Why shouldn't the potential for better thinking evolve? Introducing Post-it Dry Erase Surface, able to seamlessly stick to smooth surfaces. It lets you think any way you can imagine. Post-it Dry Erase Surface, the whiteboard evolved.
If you're 25 or over, who guarantees you'll save when switching from any comparable car policy?
We do.
Coles Car Insurance.
I saved $348.
Better spent on your grocery shopping. See what we can do for you with Little Red Hood.
With so much talk about the major banks, there's never been a better time to join the 4 million Australians who bank with mutual banks, credit unions and building societies. Find out why at checkoutthecompetition.com.au.
Authorised by M. Dicatati, Cobar, Sydney.
Every day I go to school without the right uniform and proper shoes. Most of the time I just want to hide. And it's not just me. Lots of other kids don't have what they need for school either. There's no way I can even dream about going on excursions. So I don't ask anymore. Without some help, nothing's going to change.
You can help end poverty one student at a time. 5,000 Australian children like Annie are waiting for sponsors right now. Please call 1800 996677 to sponsor a child through the Smith family today.
With someone like you by my side, I won't have to go without.
Dreaming of a luxurious holiday? With Luxury Escapes, it's possible. We work with the world's best hotels to create incredible holidays at prices we can all afford. When you book with Luxury Escapes, you also get VIP inclusions. First, download the app or go to luxuryescapes.com. Then browse our offers. Purchase online or call one of our experts, available 7 days a week. Discover the world's best holidays today with Luxury Escapes.
Welcome back. You're watching Sunday Agenda. We've got the Greens leader Richard Di Natale coming up, also the New Zealand Prime Minister Bill English. At the moment, we're talking to the Environment and Energy Minister Josh Frydenberg. Mr Frydenberg, during the program, a tweet directed at your good self from clearly one of our viewers, Senator Malcolm Roberts from One Nation. He says you're wrong and that you, through the renewable energy target, have wreaked destruction, his words, on Australia. He's not alone in that view. I mean, that's Tony Abbott's view. He wants Australia to pull out of the RET.
Well, if we pulled out of the RET tomorrow, what would happen is, or we tried to pull out, what would happen is that the cost of the certificates would go up, and that would mean an effective tax on households and businesses, because they would be passed on to them by the retailers. So
have you tried to explain that to Tony Abbott, though? Because he says that pulling out of the RET is one of the solutions to lowering energy prices.
Well, as you know, it was Tony Abbott's government which reached an agreement with the Labor Party on the 23.5% RET. But it's nearly all done, the RET. It's set at 33,000 gigawatt hours. There's been a major jump in renewable investment in 2016, a five-fold increase on 2015. Now, the problem with the RET has been that there were no geographical restrictions on where those investments could go, and so we saw a rapid increase in investment in South Australia, and the Weatherall government didn't plan or prepare for that with the necessary storage backup. So that's where the penetration of renewables has done the most damage. The other problem with the RET as originally designed was there were no requirements for renewables to provide storage and backup and these frequency control and ancillary services, which is what Dr Finkel has now recommended will happen. And I think they're important suggestions. that can help stabilise the system. So the lessons of the past seem to have been learnt by Dr Finkel and his expert panel and reflected in his new recommendations.
Just on some other topics, some of your Victorian frontbench colleagues, Ministers Sukkar, Alan Tudge, as well as very senior Minister Greg Hunt, former minister in your portfolio area, they face the real possibility of contempt charges for some public comments that they've made about decisions and processes concerning the Victorian judiciary. Now, they have retracted, as I understand it, their comments, but they haven't apologised, which really was noted by the justices in question, including the Chief Justice out of the Supreme Court in Victoria. Should they apologise, and were they silly, misguided, or just plain stupid to fall into this sort of category? Extraordinary comments coming from the bench in relation to ministers of the Crown, lawyers, one and all, not understanding, seemingly, according to the bench, the separation of powers.
Well, Peter, all three are very close friends and colleagues, but despite that, I can't comment on a case that is currently before the court.
Would that have been their position? I mean, the case that they were commenting on was before the court, and that's in a sense why they're in the position that they're now in. Are you exercising the kind of judgment that they should have, and then they wouldn't have been in this position?
Look, I think less is more at this particular point in time, and so I won't say anything further on the circumstances of that particular case. But there is a broader issue about law and order in Victoria, which does concern people right across the spectrum, and the crime statistics have recently come out for Victoria, and there's been a 20% increase in serious crime over the last 12 months. Aggravated burglaries are up 28%, Peter, more than 4,000 offences. We've seen home invasions and carjackings, and even the Age newspaper, which has certainly never been described in my lifetime as a right-wing or conservative daily, has said the crime is so bad in Victoria, it's got to the point where people are feeling unsafe on the streets and unsafe in their homes. So I plead with Daniel Andrews, for now you sit on the Treasury benches, do something about the law and order situation. It's completely unacceptable. You cannot blame the federal government. You cannot blame anyone else other than your own government, because it's on your own watch that this law and order situation has now got out of control.
So is it your view that some judges seem more concerned about the terrorists than the safety of the community?
Look, I'm not going to comment on judges or on any particular cases, other than to make that broader comment that the law and order situation is now so bad that every citizen of this great state of Victoria is now concerned about walking the street or even being in their home. And how can we have that in Australia, let alone in Victoria, which has never been down that particular path before? And it's a combination of drugs, extremism, there's an ethnic component to this law and order problem, and we just cannot accept it as business as usual. We just cannot.
But in terms of timing of commentary, I mean, like the three ministers in question, you have a law degree. I believe you've practiced as a lawyer in your pre-parliamentary career. Would you ever, in the midst of an ongoing case, refer to judges as, quote, hard left activists or, quote, conducting ideological experiments? I mean, even if you want to make those kind of comments which do risk traversing the separation of powers, you've got to do it after a case, not during it, you'd have to think.
Well, Peter, now you're badgering the witness. You can ask me a half a dozen times the same question.
Okay, well, let me ask you this question then. Let me ask you, do you remember in your law study days learning as part of the I teach this in politics and it's not even law, that the separation of powers is important between the judiciary and the executive arms of government?
Look, we all understand our constitution and the three layers, if you like, of authority that you referred to, but we need to ensure that there is law and order on the streets of Victoria.
Well, you say we all understand it, Minister, but Justice Kay doesn't think that the three ministers in question understands it. He said that the MP's ignorance of the separation of powers between the government and the judiciary was disturbing, and this is his quote: That disturbs me greatly, not only as a judge of this court, but as a member of our nation.
Well, Peter, again, let's just let the legal cases, the legal processes take their normal course, and you know, I'm sure after that is done, then you know people may want to speak more freely. But right now, the case is before the courts, and I'm not going to comment.
All right, let's move to another issue that perhaps somebody from the midwinter ball shouldn't have commented on, which is the leaking of the speech of the Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull. Is it Malcolm Turnbull that perhaps should have been more discreet when commenting and mocking Donald Trump, who we all know can take a joke, or is it the journalist, if it was a journalist, that leaked it to Laurie Oakes, who should have been more discreet, or indeed should Laurie Oakes have been more discreet, even though he wasn't bound by the Chatham House rules because he wasn't in attendance at the ball?
Look, I think this is a complete storm in the teacup. I'm completely non-fussed that the speech is public, and indeed, you know, the PM played a blinder when it came to the quality of his speech. He had everyone in laughter. It was self-deprecating, it was witty, it was humorous. You know, when it comes to comparing the Prime Minister's speech and Bill Shorten's speech, to use, you know, tennis parlance, it was a six-love set. I mean, you know, they were playing it, basically playing it on a different level. And so the PM speech, I think, was very well received. I have no problem, you know, with the media around it, because everyone understands, like the White House Correspondents' Dinner, these are speeches that are given once a year by politicians. There is no, it's always only meant in the best of ways, and the Prime Minister, as he said, gave an affectionate speech, a good-humoured speech, and I think everybody appreciated who was there.
Let's move on to the issue of Gonski funding. It's the lead story in Fairfax newspapers today. The government, according to these reports, there will be more money for public schools, but less money, comparatively speaking, for Catholic schools. There's a little bit of a fight going on. It's the crossbench that will ultimately determine this, including the Greens. I'm speaking to their leader, Richard Di Natale, next. Do you think it's likely that the crossbench will support this legislation through the final sitting week before the winter recess?
Look, Simon Birmingham is the minister in charge. He's doing a terrific job in a very difficult, complex policy area. Obviously, he's best placed to give you that judgment. But certainly, we believe that the Turnbull government's record investment in schools, $18.6 billion of additional money, a 75% increase, 9,000 schools are better off. You'll see every sector get more money under the Turnbull government's plan, and it's important to point out that government schools will get more than a 5% increase over the next 10 years, and the Catholic school system will get more than a 3% increase, indeed $3.4 billion extra over the next 10 years. So you're going to see the Catholic schools still be able to provide the money as it sees fit to the schools within its system, but you're also going to see the independent and the government school sector also benefit, and I think it's a good outcome for all, and the sooner we get it legislated, the better. And it is worth pointing out, Peter, again, Bill Shorten doesn't walk the talk. 75 times he said he supports need-based funding. Despite this, he's standing in the way of $18.6 billion of additional money, including tens of millions of dollars to schools in his own electorate. It doesn't matter if it's...
But their pledge is to put even more money in if they win the election.
It's funny money with the Labor Party. It's funny money. They can't deliver balanced budgets, and they don't ever properly cost and fund
it
their
might
proposals.
be borrowed money. I won't take issue with that. We'll wait and see what they come up with in terms of their costings ahead of the next election. But it's real money. I mean, they're going to put it in even if it costs the budget.
Well, you've even heard there's statements on the record from their front benches saying, "Oh, I'm not sure if it's $22 billion. It might be something slightly different. Let's just wait and see." The point is, whether it's on company tax where Bill Shorten was a great proponent of lowering company tax, but now he's not prepared to support our legislation, whether it's on the Medicare levy to fully fund the NDIS, when previously he had supported such a move when Labor was in government, but is now rejecting our move that we are in government, or this issue of education. He is not walking the talk. And I could even add to that energy policy when just over the last week, when he's now rejected our moves to change the Clean Energy Finance Corporation to fund carbon capture and storage, which was a totemic policy for the Labor Party when they were in government, and which the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the chief scientists and the IEA and in businesses across Australia says is absolutely critical to moving to a lower emissions future. You see, with Bill Shorten, it's all about the politics, not about the policy. And I think people
But isn't good
are starting
politics
to see
good
through
policy, Josh Frydenberg?
No, good policy is good politics, and he's pursuing the politics, not the policy.
Just one final question now that we're back on your portfolio, if I can. I noticed, I've seen reports that Corey Bernardi, almost ironically, has put some solar panels on the roof of his house, given some of his previous comments about energy supply and all the rest of it. Quick question, as the Environment Minister, a question without notice. Have you got solar panels on your roof?
No, I don't, and
Why
I
is
would
that?
welcome. Well, I just haven't got around to putting them on my roof, but obviously it would lower my bills if I did.
Have you looked into it?
Over time? Yeah, I've looked into it, and it is something that 17% of Australian households now have. We've got the highest number of solar panels on people's roofs.
Why are you
on a
part of
per
the
capita basis.
83% though, Josh Frydenberg? Shouldn't you be setting the example?
Well, yeah, it's inertia. I'm a slow mover. But certainly it has been taken up with gusto. As you know, the Prime Minister, Peter, has solar panels on his roof, and he often shows me on his phone, the power coming in and the power going out. But the point is, we have the highest take-up of solar panels on people's roofs anywhere in the world on a per capita basis. In Queensland, it's more than 30%. And this is the pathway to a more distributed energy network. This is just some of the technology that is taking place across the energy system, which makes the policies of yesteryear, stale in comparison to what we need going into the future.
Well, maybe you and I need to start leading by example, because like you, I haven't got them either. We're out of time. Minister Frydenberg, appreciate you joining us on Sunday Agenda. Thanks for your company.
Good to speak to you, Pete, and maybe we'll get that electric vehicle while we're at it. How's that?
All right, cheers. We're going to take a quick break here on Sunday Agenda. We've been talking to the Environment and Energy Minister. When we come back, we're going to talk to the Greens leader, Senator Richard Di Natale.